Welcome to Divorce and Relationships Decoded, the show that takes the guesswork out of love, loss, and everything in between. Hosted by me, Jennifer Perri, a CDC Certified Divorce and Empowerment Coach, and Dr. Deborah Wilder, a divorce and relationship expert. This is the place where real conversations meet expert advice. So get ready to decode divorce and relationships like never before. Divorce and Relationships Decoded starts now. Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Jennifer Perri. I'm a CDC Certified Divorce Coach, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Deborah Wilder, who is a divorce and relationship specialist. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. We want to talk about something that we both get a lot of questions about. We also work with our clients about, and it's boundary set. But it's so important that we're going to have to do it in two parts. Are you okay with that, Dr. Wilder, if we do that?
Sounds good to me. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are understanding boundaries, understanding why they're important in a relationship, understanding how to set boundaries, and then how to keep that promise that you're making to yourself, because sometimes it's difficult when we move into a relationship with somebody. It's like the two go into one. And for a lot of us, myself included, I've been down this path. You lose who you are in the midst of all of it. And I'm a firm believer that we do teach people how to treat us. And it's very important to both of us to talk about boundaries. First of all, what are boundaries in a relationship?
I think boundaries are ways that we're setting up expectations that will allow us to feel respected and at the same time honoring the relationship. If there are things that I don't like when someone does, for example, let's say I don't like to be interrupted. That might be one of my boundaries. And then we can talk about how do you express those boundaries? How do you let someone know what your boundaries are in a nice way, in a thoughtful way, in a respectful way? The boundaries are there to help keep us emotionally and mentally, of course, physically, but in a relationship safe and comfortable. So when I talk about interrupting, that goes into kind of communication styles and things like that. But a boundary could have to do with relationships with other people as well. Honor my relationship with my family. That's something that is a boundary for me. You're not going to keep me from talking to my family. Or if I'm talking to someone in my family, that doesn't mean you can just come in and just start something. So those are not really deep boundaries, but they're ways to honor our relationship, but create respect as well. Something a little more serious might be lying. That's a boundary. I'm not going to be happy if you're going to lie to me. So if you cross that boundary, there are going to be consequences to our relationship. That doesn't mean you're going to be punished, but it's going to affect the relationship. So it can be anything from interrupting in a conversation to lying or staying out and not letting me know where you are. And this isn't just with relationships, partner relationships, it could be with anybody. These are ways for us to set expectations, and then we need to be consistent in reinforcing those boundaries, because boundaries are meaningless if we don't reinforce them. And if we don't reinforce them, then we're not going to be taken seriously. So what a boundary does is it just sets a standard for how I want to be treated, how you want to be treated, while still honoring and having a permeable relationship with somebody. What are your thoughts?
I feel the exact same way. It took me a little while to get to the point where I set my boundaries and enforce them. Sometimes I see it a lot even with me as a parent. We need to set boundaries. And how many times as a parent, I know I did it all the time. I'm a mom of 3 boys. Would you say, if you do it again, there's going to be consequences? But then they would do it a second and a third and a fourth time. And I think now more so than ever, I see parents that have really specific boundaries in their own personal life, but zero boundaries for their children. I think it's so important that if you are going to establish boundaries, you establish them in any relationship that's important to you. Me personally, I know for some people it's easier to say that than actually do it, myself included, for a very long time. But I think as we get older, you learn that you don't need to have a ton of people in your life. At least for me, I have a quality group of people in my circle, you being one of those. If you have such a big group of people, you can't really build the intimate relationships and friendships that I think is what really makes life wonderful. But you also have to have boundaries in that space. You don't want to start a new relationship and say, I'm going to talk to you about what I need in that tone. So do you think it's a conversation you have at the beginning of the relationship or as you broach different things in the relationship?
Probably there's some things that you start off in the beginning, and then you just keep talking, keep having these discussions. Now, if there are things that are non-negotiables, and we may have mentioned non-negotiables before, I can't remember, but
Would you want to
that's
take a second and explain what that is?
sure. So a non-negotiable is what it is. If you cheat, we're done. Doesn't matter. If you stay out all night and you're not at the hospital, so we're done. If you are, let's say, have had addiction issues and you've been sober, but you start drinking again. These are things that there are just lines drawn. A boundary is somewhat similar to a non-negotiable, but it's not as harsh. A boundary, again, it's not that it's permeable, but a non-negotiable means that's it. Either the relationship is done or some major consequence, or there's some specific consequence of that action, that non-negotiable. Basically, what that means is I'm not going to be in this relationship if you do these things that are non-negotiable. Boundaries are slightly different, and you can learn about them over time. If you're in a big family and every Sunday you have a big family dinner, and that might be a non-negotiable. I will never not go to my family dinner, regardless of what you want to do. You either join me or that sort of thing. So again, boundaries are there to keep us, set up a set of expectations for us to feel respected and yet honor the relationship. And as you just mentioned a little while before, how you share the boundaries is important. If I said to you, I can't stand when you interrupt me, versus when you start talking, and I must say I do interrupt a lot. I just have to say that. So that's not one of my things. I'm just throwing that out there. And I say it to my patients and my clients too. I'm like, you will notice that I interrupt, not because I need to hear myself talk. I talk all day. I don't need to hear that. But I want to catch you right as you're saying something so we can talk about it. I can understand it and we can take it in real time. So that's interrupting isn't really one of my things, but there's a way to say something. When I'm talking and you start talking, it really frustrates me. And there are ways to establish boundaries. There are ways to bring someone's attention to when he or she might be crossing a boundary, if that makes sense. So being respectful is important when you're setting your boundaries. And sometimes we don't know what our boundaries are until they're crossed. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then they become a boundary that we have to now set and figure out, what do I do with this and how do we make this work in our relationship?
I think at the beginning of a relationship, definitely talking about your non-negotiables. I think too, boundary setting could probably play in a little bit with what we talked about last week, which was love languages too. One of the love languages was physical touch. And if you have somebody who's very big on touching you in public or just touching you all the time, and that is a boundary, I think that's a conversation over a nice glass of wine or a nice dinner. You want to be respectful of the other person. You understand this is how they love you or they show love, but them respecting too how that makes you feel.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point to talk about your non-negotiables and then talk about your boundaries.
A boundary is not a barrier. So a boundary is just something that keeps us, it's a standard that we set for ourselves and really for our relationships that keeps us feeling safe and respected, but allowing people to come in and allowing us to go into their lives as well. It's establishing a standard that keeps us feeling stronger, empowered, respected, and treated properly. And with hopefully the expectation that we'll do that for someone else, but it's not a barrier that keeps someone away. A boundary doesn't mean you can't get close to me. It just defines how I am comfortable with your getting close with me. It's like what I would hope would happen in our relationship. So again, not a barrier, but it's a set of expectations and standards to keep us feeling respected while at the same time honoring the nature of the relationship that we're in.
That's a great way to look at it. It's almost like boundaries and budget. They go hand in hand with being two words that people are like, I don't want to talk about that. I love setting non-negotiables at the beginning of really any relationship. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know definitely in an intimate relationship with someone, but I think also too, as you raise your children, setting boundaries that are probably age appropriate. And we could talk about that at another point in time, but even in your relationships, because I have friends that cross boundaries. I should say I had friends that would cross boundaries even after established. You need to understand there's going to be people that come into your life that either teach you a lesson or a complete blessing. You find people that do both, but you have to learn how to let go of people who don't respect your space, your time, your energy, and you have to protect your peace at all costs. So before we get ready to wrap up today, we're going to come back next week and we're going to talk about part 2 of boundary setting, which is creating a personal no manifesto, but also understanding how not to lose yourself when you love someone. But before we wrap up today, is there one piece of advice you can give somebody who is starting at the beginning of a new relationship to start talking about boundaries?
Yes. So there are some specific topics that are really necessary to get into before you get married. Because once you're married, let's say once you start, more so when you start having children, let's just say, but you want to take care of as much as you can. And some of these might be non-negotiables. Others might be a conversation. You've got people over here and you've got to figure out how do you build that bridge. And so that's where I think the permeability and the flexibility can come in with topics. But if there is a set boundary or if there is a non-negotiable, got to pay attention to that. I think some people get married thinking that they're going to change that or thinking that they're going to really not take that seriously or it's not so important. And then sometimes we end up in horrible places in our relationships. So boundaries are important, respecting ourselves and respecting the relationship and discovering who we are as well as we're getting older and in relationships and things like that. So those are important things to have, because if you don't protect yourself, that's when you can feel like you're maybe losing yourself or you're afraid to do that, as you were alluding to a little while ago.
My non-negotiables are, if you try to sever my relationship with my children, this is not going to work. Making sure that we sit and talk, like conversations that we have head on, no matter how hard they're going to be. That's a non-negotiable. I want to talk about things. I want to communicate about things when something is wrong. Those are non-negotiables for me. And that came after a lifetime of situations and relationships where I allowed my boundaries to be crossed so many times and I didn't really establish non-negotiables. I think you get to a point now where you're like, no, this is what happened here. I don't want it to happen here. So for that is, don't sever my ties with my kids. Let's make sure that we are always in communication, open communication with each other. And if there's something that we face, let's face it head on immediately and be respectful. Do you have non-negotiables that kind of go across relationships?
That's a good question. I'm sure that I do. Like you, with my family, there's nobody who's going to come between me and my children ever. That will never happen. It never has happened. Or my family, my extended family, my siblings and my mom. Again, my dad has passed, but there's nobody who's going to come in between. Family's most important to me. And respecting who I am, my religion, respecting my culture. And if someone crosses that line, and there's a whole lot of that going around in this world today, then that is absolutely a non-negotiable as well. But I'm sure there are others I just can't really think. Certainly in a relationship, cheating is a no-no. Any addictive sort of behaviors are not okay. I hadn't thought about that in a while. I think we all have non-negotiables in theory sometimes than in actual action, until perhaps we reach a point of being pushed so far that we have to either go over the cliff or stop.
Please make sure that you come back and you follow us for part 2 of boundaries. We're going to talk about creating a personal no manifesto. We're going to talk about how not to lose yourself when you love someone. Dr. Wilder, as always, is so much fun having conversations with you. I always walk away with key points that we talk about and the guidance that you give. And I'm trying to be respectful, not look down and write them. So I'll have to remind myself of them when I watch the YouTube. But thank you as always for coming and for sharing your insight and your advice with everyone. And I always enjoy spending this time with you. But we will be back again with the question of the week, and we'll be back for part 2 of boundaries. So make sure you join us. Bye, Dr. Wilder.
Well, before we say goodbye, I want to say it goes both ways, Jennifer. It goes both ways. Certainly on these calls, it goes both ways. You are extraordinarily valuable, and I always get something from you as well. So just saying.
Thank you very much.
Talking with you again.
Thank you very much. We will see you all back next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. If this conversation resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, healing, growth, and transformation happens one conversation at a time. If you have a question, a story, or a topic you'd love for us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note at questions@drdecoded.com. Your thoughts and experiences are always welcome here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another insightful episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. Until then, take care and keep moving forward.